A lot of us get out of the military thinking that the hard part is behind us. We've got a decent job, we got a family, new routine, but something just still feels off. It's like you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, or at least what they tell you to do, but you don't feel like yourself. That's exactly where Susannah Stokes found herself after leaving the Marine Corps. She tried the corporate path, she checked all the boxes, but underneath, she still felt like she was carrying things that no one else could see and struggling to figure out what came next. In this episode, Susannah opens up about what it's really like to lose your sense of identity after service and how her search for clarity led her somewhere unexpected into the world of psychedelics. She got into healing and inner work that most of us were never taught to even consider when getting out of the military, or anywhere else for that matter. But before we begin getting into this episode, I do want to take a moment to raise awareness for something that's deeply important to me and to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial serves as both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you would like to learn more or find out how you can support their mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now let's get into it. Hey, Susannah, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here. Looking forward to this conversation.
I am so glad to be here, and thank you for what you're doing, Scott. This is so important in the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. It's something that we all need to kind of come together as veterans and help each other out, in whatever way we can. And this is just, one of those small ways that I feel like I can help out. And, you have a lot of great stuff that you have going on too, which I'm sure we'll get into in just a bit. But before we get into that side of things, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your military background and, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, it is always interesting speaking about my time in the military and other parts of my life because it often feels like there are multiple lives that I've already lived. So I'm like, oh,
Right.
there was that Susannah, there was this next Susannah, and then now there's this Susannah. And the evolution has been really beautiful and painful and all of the things.
Sure.
But the short intro is that little Susannah, grew up on an organic blueberry farm in Georgia, where I really deeply connected to Earth and the medicine that is our planet, and also then was also raised in the South. So I was raised in a lot of those traditional values. My grandfather was a bishop in the Methodist Church, so that was very strongly rooted into, a Christian kind of base. And then I chose, because of my father's encouragement, we might say, there are other words for it, but strong encouragement to join the military, especially the Marine Corps. And so I made the decision to choose the Naval Academy as a path of education. And then that led me into the Marine Corps. And then I spent 2 deployments in Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And that then led me into the tech industry and the corporate world and trying to find myself, trying to find my purpose, like, where am I? Who am I? And that was a whole journey of discovery. And those were powerful years for redefining more of who you see today. But then I stepped into motherhood, and that was the real, like, grounding into,
Sure.
oh, this
Sure.
is who I am. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always interesting to hear people's journey and where they started from and where they ended up. And if you look at a lot of people and see what their upbringing was, and you say, where do you think this person's going to be in 20 years, 30 years, whatever. And a lot of times you're not going to be able to nail that one on the head because it life throws so many curveballs, and just experiences accumulate and just shape the way you see the world, the what things
Mhm.
that you do in life. And so it's all good, it's all interesting stuff that takes place in life. That's what makes life interesting, I suppose, right? And
Mhm.
but
The
like you
spice.
said, Yeah, the spice, right? Yeah, exactly. But like you
Mhm.
said, it's challenging too at times. And I'm sure some of your time in the military was challenging. Sometime maybe after the military, even before. I'm sure there were
Yeah.
challenges that helped you grow and helped you learn different lessons, right? Throughout your time, here on this planet, right? I mean, we all learn stuff, right? So after you got out of the military, 2 deployments to Afghanistan, all this stuff that you did, you went to go work in corporate America like a lot of individuals do after getting out of the military. How do you feel like your military experience shaped that leadership style, or shape your experience in the business world?
Yeah, I think that was a sort of necessary and natural transition because the corporate world is also a very large organizational structure. So it had that same level of safety. There's so many overlaps. People were like, that's weird. You went from the Marine Corps into Facebook. Like that seems like opposite. And I'm like, no, not when you're going from an organization that has 175,000 people. And then you go into an organization that, at least when I was there, grew from about 15,000 to 30,000. So there is that same level of organizational structure. A
Hmm.
lot of the new tech industries are quite literally doing everything for you. I mean, they do your dry cleaning, they feed you, they create a whole lifestyle for you, which is very similar to the Marine Corps, the military in
Right.
general, where you have a tribe of people who are all working on the same thing, type A, performance based, competitive personalities. So I found that there was a lot of overlap. The challenge in leadership for me was that leadership is not trained anywhere but the military right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's not like there's no direct training for leadership. People have to go on their own to do self development, professional development programs in order to define themselves as leaders because our systems, particularly in the corporate world, do not support that. So I found that a lot of my soft skills as a leader were not appreciated. They were not seen or understood. And then because I didn't necessarily have the jargon of the positioning on my resume, I would then be put into positions that were lower than what I really had the capacity to hold.
Sure.
And that ended up being a sort of, maybe if at that time it was more of like a vendetta. That was sort of my vendetta, my mission in the corporate industry and particularly at Facebook was to help veterans who were coming into the company to be more deeply honored for the soft skills that they carried and to be placed in higher roles because I didn't want what happened to me to happen to other people.
No, and that is actually a good warning for some other folks who might be in that process of transitioning out and getting into their first civilian job. I mean, yeah, that stuff does not translate. And someone who's has zero experience with the military, and even sometimes no experience with maybe the Marine Corps, maybe they came from, the Air Force or something, and they may not exactly what it is that you did in the Marine Corps, because some of the acronyms and the other things don't necessarily translate to what they know. And so, yeah, you may not be put into a position that you feel is, the right position. So kind of translating some of that stuff into, I guess, civilian speak, if you will, and kind of making that make sense for folks. But another thing that you mentioned, which before you mentioning it, I don't think I had ever really considered it, but how some of the tech companies, they take care of a lot of things like meals and dry cleaning and all these other perks of the job, right? But like how many other jobs are out there outside of the military that take care of meals and have like that kind of involvement in your day-to-day life? And that might be a bit of an easier transition, actually, because you're used to being able to go to the chow hall or whatever, and be able to have that stuff just there readily available, and that's just a part of your work life, really. And going into a civilian job that also has that sounds like that might be a little bit easier of a transition when you don't have to necessarily worry about all those things. I know it's a small thing, but it's a thing that you
Oh, no. I
do
mean,
day after day,
these
right?
felt huge. It was so funny because in the transition programs, I think like in the Army or the Navy, they call it TAPS. In the Marine
Yeah,
Corps, it's like TRS. I forget which ones,
sure.
transition readiness, essentially, which were never that robust of programs because ultimately they're not investing a lot in the transition process for veterans because they really just want you to stay as long as you can. But at some point, they're going to leave, like you're going to retire or you're going to leave somehow.
Hmm.
So these transition programs really were not as effective as they could have been. But one thing that they said over and over again, kind of in the same energy of when your math teacher in middle school said, you're not going to always have a calculator in your pocket, right? And you're like, here you are, like with
Here
your
it is.
phone, and you're like, actually, Miss Betty,
Yeah, right.
yes, I will. So the same thing was true about the transition seminars. They were like, it's not like you're going to go, you're not going to have all these things that the military is going to offer you. You're not going to have like your meals ready. You're not going to have housing provided. You're not going to have all of this. And when I got to Facebook, I was like, which is now Meta, of course,
Hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, no, actually, I am going to have all of these things and I'm going to have them better. And they're going to be, the food is going to be tastier.
Sure.
And so there was an upgrade feeling of that, but it came with its own challenges, right? Just like everything has sort of the light and the dark. The boundaries with work were significantly reduced in the corporate industry because there isn't that leadership. And so you don't have wonderful leaders who have been trained in how to professionally activate their team to their greatest capacity. I did
Mhm.
get very lucky to be with some leaders, one of whom was a veteran who had been a supply officer in the military, and so he had a lot of experience. But and then both of my a couple of other managers that I had were really and are still very dear friends of mine and are wonderful leaders. But that was just through their own understanding of it. And so I found, when I was at Facebook, I ended up growing the veteran program called Facebook Veterans Group from about 2000, 200 to 2000. And we built chapters all around the world. We went from a couple chapters to over 20 chapters around the world and just built the movement around understanding the importance of veterans, not just for their service and not from the lens of these people have post-trauma,
Hmm.
but from the lens of these people have incredible training and soft skills that this organization needs, and we need to honor them and sort of enhance their experience. So that was a big mission for me, and it felt very helpful for easing some of the identity crisis that I was going through as I
Sure.
left the military. And because I'd always thought I was going to be career military and very quickly realized that the Marine Corps was not built for me. I have a tattoo on my head. Like that is, I'm not their people for
Sure.
20 years, but it set me up for incredible success in life. And for that, I am grateful.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the folks that I talk to, anyways, is the experience that they have in the military, regardless of the branch of service. It sets them up for successes down the road if they know how to leverage that experience for that particular type of success that they're looking for in a career. The leadership skills, regardless of what rank you held in the military. I mean, everyone down to a private all the way up the chain of command, it has some leadership skills built into them, and they learn these things, just through maybe osmosis, if you will, just from watching how their leadership does things, and then you can kind of take that away, and that helps you down the road too. So that's I always like to talk about people's transition, and was it difficult, was it hard, was it easy for you, there's all sorts of different things that people experience in that transition, and some people have just such a terrible time, and they don't know how to handle that transition. But in your case, it seemed like there were some challenges for sure, and I think a lot of people do have challenges, but you found a good fit for you anyways, and it helped with that transition from military to civilian life, right? And you also talked just a little bit in the very beginning about kind of some of the faith and things like that as you were growing up. And you had prior to us starting to record here, I had seen something about you talking about a spiritual awakening at some point during this process. What sparked that for you, and what was that all about?
Yeah, well, that identity crisis, which I think every veteran goes through, is something that is usually born from us not living in our full expression of who we are. And what I say in that is I didn't remember who I am. And I was wearing a lot of masks. And a lot of those masks were built in trauma. And that's often what draws us into the military in the first place, is that desire and that need for the chaotic energy, so that then I can build the structure and the discipline to fully own my, and sort of in some ways be the warrior against my inner trauma. But ultimately, that got really loud as I was getting out of the military, because I didn't have that mission to focus on in the same way. And it led me into exploration of things. And what I found were psychedelics. I found psychedelic medicines first recreationally. I first experienced them just through the Burning Man culture, because I was living in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And the Bay Area just has a whole different culture around psychedelics. They've been very present there since the 70s and even before that. And so people don't see them as much as the same kind of threat that a lot of the rest of the country does.
Sure.
So the energy around it was much softer, and I began to explore, and through a combination of ritual ceremonies and recreational exploration, I was basically meditating on a mountain in California and had a full download of who I am, what my purpose is. And I got to see my bloodlines and how the perfection of all of the ancestors that came together to create me created a perfect being that is designed for a very particular thing in the world. And it was more general in that moment. And over time, I've defined it more and more. But it basically was you do healing work, Susannah. You are a healer. And there's a lot of, verbiage around, well, nobody heals anyone else. We only heal ourselves, and then we get to mirror that. But what does that mean to you, right? So I learned I was a healer. I learned that I really worked in the frequency of healing and activation. And then I needed to be doing this purpose work that was much more spiritual. And basically it said okay, so you should probably stop doing all of this other stuff. That's wasting your time.
Sure. Well, and that's a good point too, because I think a lot of us coming out of the military, our identities are tied into the military so much, and when we leave, who you
Who
get
am
that
I?
identity crisis. Who am
Yes.
I? What am I supposed to do with myself?
Mhm.
What is my purpose? And trying to figure that out is not always easy, especially when you're latched onto that thing, like the military, the Marine Corps,
Mhm.
the Army, the Navy,
Mhm.
whatever, and you're just latched onto it. And that if you're leaving that, that's no longer your purpose. You're not there to serve the Marine Corps
Uh-uh.
anymore.
Uh-uh.
You're out.
Yep.
You're done. Like you said, it just isn't it wasn't a good fit for you for long term. And it was a good experience probably for you while you're in it, but it's not a long term thing for you. And so what's next? And I think we have to be open to that question and what that answer could be, and be open to it not having anything to do with the military, not having it to do anything with anything in particular. Just be open to
Mhm.
a wide variety of different things that it could be. And then you start to open up that door to the possibilities that, like, hey, I think my purpose is, like in your case, is healing people, or my
Mhm.
purpose might be in, helping veterans with something, or helping dogs, or whatever.
Mhm.
I don't know, whatever it
Mhm.
is, you have a purpose. And I think you phrased it in an interesting way, that, all of your ancestors came together and created this perfect person for this particular
Mhm.
role, right? You're
Yeah.
not a perfect person for every role, but you're a
Right.
perfect person for this particular role, and this is what you are, what you feel like you're meant to do, is I think kind of
Yeah. I
the
mean,
gist
it's
of it, right?
it's like a hammer,
Yeah,
right? I'm not going to try to use a hammer to screw in nails.
sure.
Like, stop doing that. That's not working.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Right? And so the hammer has a very particular purpose,
right.
and it is there to hammer in the nails in that particular way, and sometimes remove them, right? Because it's got the
Sure.
other side. Maybe you can use it for a couple other things that, you're hammering big stakes into the ground, things like that. But ultimately, it is there for this motion.
Right.
And ultimately, we as humans are built with the specificity and the sort of infrastructure within our systems. What I finally learned through various understandings of myself through systems like human design, and if you even see it like models of cars, I love cars. So, a Porsche is not designed to be going off road and doing the same thing that a Jeep Wrangler is here to do.
Sure. Sure.
So allow yourself. And yes, we have a world where we have this ability to explore and understand all the different dynamics. People can understand different facets of themselves,
Hmm.
but you have a thing you came here to do. So do that thing,
Right.
and discover what that thing is, because that will be the greatest power that you could ever expand into, and allow, that, just like what you said, the openness is
Hmm.
really key. And for me, that openness was built on disillusionment, which is what most of us have to start with. Being in the military and in war, I looked around and I said, how in the world is it possible that God could allow this to happen? The God that I knew, the God that I grew up with, that was more of a masculine archetype with a white beard and is on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, like that version of God that's puppeteering everything. I was like, how in the world? So then I lost my construct of God. I
Hmm.
lost my faith. I lost all of my religion. I basically went full open to, okay, well, that construct, that idea is no longer working for me. This rose-colored glasses of what the military should have been, but actually it turned out to be my personal hell, was not what I thought it was going to be. So now what? Now what? And I just asked, now what?
Yeah, and I think that's a question that a lot of us end up having, is now what? Right?
Now
Like,
what? Yep.
now what after the military? Now what after I tried that thing and it didn't seem to work out? Now, all right, great.
Mm-mm.
Now what? What do I do next? And that's a big part of what I want to do with this show, not just this particular episode, but this podcast in general, is just letting people know that there are options out there for you, whether you've tried, one type of therapy or another, and or you've tried one type of career or another, and these things just don't seem to be working for you, and you're sitting there scratching your head saying, now what? Well, there's something else out there for you. You can
Yeah.
keep trying different things, and I think that's part of the whole process, is to just keep trying. I mean,
Mhm.
if we just gave up and said, gee, I don't know, if I'll ever find what my purpose is, and I just, I'll just give up on that. Well, then, okay, well, good luck. You're not going to find
Mhm.
what your purpose is, right? But if you do give it a shot, and you don't find it, well, and then you give it a shot with something else, and again and again, and eventually you're going to find it. You'll get to, whatever that place is. But you had mentioned earlier that psychedelics were kind of a part of this journey for you, and
Yeah.
I know there's I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more,
Yeah.
because I know there's some folks who might be a little skeptical about that, or just unfamiliar. You
Mhm.
kind of alluded to that too. It's a little bit more accepting of it in, the San Francisco area, but maybe not everywhere is like that. Explain how that worked for you. Like, what what led you to that to using the psychedelics, and how did it help you? In what way did it help?
Oh man, so many things.
And it's
So
probably a
many
loaded
things.
question, right?
You love that question. Thank you for the tee up on that one,
Sure.
because truly psychedelics were a massive moment, or a partner, I would say, in my awakening process of recognizing who I am and finding that purpose that felt authentic to who I am, versus the surface layer of purpose that we're often looking for in the material world, where we're looking for a sense of like, oh, maybe I can grab that, or I can do this with my day, or I can get this job and that will be my purpose. You could even have a job that is completely aligned with your purpose, but if you are not understanding what your purpose actually is and how deep it goes into your being and into your spiritual process, then it will still feel very empty. And that's what psychedelics did for me. It connected me deeper to the true intention of why I was doing the things I was doing. And the way it does that on a neurological level is in the brain. And of course, we're still working on the research of what it does to the heart mind and even the gut mind, because there are three minds in our body. But in the brain mind, in the head mind, we are allowing these medicines to quiet the default mode network of the brain. And the default mode network is that pattern-based behavior that tells you when you get in the car, I use this hand, I pull the seatbelt across, I plug it in, I put my hands on the wheel, I put my right foot on the gas. I
Sure.
know how to do it. It's the muscle memory of this is how I do this thing. And then on the challenging side, the default mode network gives you your shadow behaviors. It gives you your subconscious reactions to things. So when someone says, and they get really big in a fight with you, maybe your partner or someone you love gets really big in a fight with you, and you're like, I'm disappointed in you. Your response to that may be to just leave the room and walk away and slam the door, right? That's an unconscious behavior that is built in the default mode network of the brain, because that's what you used when you were a child to escape some sorts of big arguments between parents or caregivers. So this becomes aware to you through the work with psychedelics. And in macro sessions, you can go deep into that, and you can go even deeper into those trauma experiences, those traumatic experiences, and unpack them and untangle them and start to understand, oh, I was just a little child when I saw my parents fight like this. And I watched my father leave the room and slam the door on my mother. And so that's the pattern that I learned. But that pattern is actually no longer serving me and my wife, for example,
Sure.
right? And the medicine can help you recalibrate that experience in micro ways. If we work in a microdosing protocol, our organization, you can either work with a one-on-one facilitator or a group facilitator with macro sessions, or you can do virtual courses and programs with microdosing protocols. And with microdosing protocols, you get the sort of little bits of untangling over time. And that's why our protocols are 3 months, because it takes 2.5 to 3 months to make or break a habit based on a lot of scientific research. And it allows these neural pathways to be rebuilt, because the way that neural pathways work is that the serotonin will take those neurons through the groove, basically super highways in your brain. And it knows this is how I get from this place to this place. But what that doesn't leave room for is creativity. And that is what you're talking about with the openness, right?
Yeah.
The ability to be very open and curious allows us to problem solve in a completely new way. So that when I get into that fight with my colleague or my partner and they start to yell, instead of me shrinking or running, I go, hold on, let me sit here and breathe for 3 seconds. Will you breathe with me? And then let's regulate, let's co-regulate, and let's figure out how to come back to a place of peace and connection. And then we can problem solve from our prefrontal cortex, which is really the adult part of the brain. versus the amygdala, which is our reptilian fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain. And that is how these medicines really work. They completely rewire us from amygdala response into prefrontal cortex if you allow it, and if you're working with intention, ideally with a protocol.
Right. And I think that that's an important piece. I'm glad you brought that up too, is that, if you're just doing this with no real intentions, you're not really, being purposeful with it, it could rewire some things, but it may not be the way you want it to go. And so it's important to, do this with some sort of intention, and, ideally working with somebody who knows what they're doing and can help guide you through, this whole process, because, just going it on your own may not be the best way to
I mean,
tackle that,
you
right?
can easily re-traumatize, right? So you can go back, for example, that those medicines can take you back into the trauma response. And then a lot of people will say, well, what about bad trips? My experience with bad trips is almost always they're unguided. Number one, usually they are a recreational experience where you expected to have a good time with a medicine, and you don't respect that it's actually a medicine.
Sure.
It's like taking NyQuil to go party. Like, don't do that. Like, that's not going to help you. Yeah. So recognize that it's a medicine and it's going to do a thing, right? It's going to be working on your body and your brain and your entire physiology while you are with it. And so bad trips are often just incomplete trips. So they are journeys where you travel into the trauma because the medicine took you into the traumatic response or the traumatic experience you had often when you were small, and you don't have the capacity to meet it or to understand what it's doing or to be able to recalibrate it. You don't have guidance. And so then you end up staying there. And a part of your brain gets stuck there for a little while until you either come back to the medicine or you find another person who can help you untangle it and recalibrate it. And sometimes people will sit with those for decades. I mean, we've had people come to us and say, oh, I had a bad trip in high school, and they're now in their 50s. And they're like, I don't know, like, I'm nervous about it. And I'm like, it's because you've been sitting with this unfinished business for several decades that is now scratching at your brain and is saying, this is the only way that we're going to complete this. So we do believe in completion of processes, and that will get you out of that loop, which those loops often then create addictive tendencies. They create harmful relationship patterns, attachment wounds, and things like that keep us in these little safety boxes of trauma. But really, those safety boxes end up being shields from connection, and deeper and deeper and deeper, we become more and more depressed.
Yeah, and the way you described how this works and how this helps kind of rewire some parts of the brain, the way it was described to me is like, think of a stream that eventually becomes a river, and, and all that stuff. It kind of wears away at the earth and eventually forms a deeper and deeper, I guess, crack.
Yeah, like a crevice, a groove, right? Yeah. Grand Canyon.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when you get those really deep ingrained, connections in your brain, that's like the Grand Canyon type of thing. And that's going to take some work to get that to be
moved over
to someplace else, right? You're not going to easily do that.
The water has to come up all the way up to the top and out. Yes.
It may no longer be the best way to get water from point A to point B. But it's just the way it's always been, and that's just the way it always is. And so it kind of gets stuck in that pattern that it flows through. And so, like, that's maybe not the best thing for that particular stream, or that particular river in this case.
Right.
But through, what you're talking about here, you're able to say, okay, let's get creative with how we move this water, and let's move it, instead of going, following the same route that we always have. Let's maybe, build something else, and we'll send it a different direction, and maybe that's a better direction for it to end up going. And when it was described to me that way, it kind of made sense that there are those connections in your brain. I mean, it's obviously not a river; it's just an analogy, but it's a connection from one point to another in your brain, and it might be flowing past a place that it doesn't need to be flowing past, and maybe you need to, kind of redirect some of that stuff and to get yourself out of those old ways of thinking, old ways of doing things that, like you
Yeah.
said, are no longer serving you anymore, but are
Yeah.
just the way things have always been done. So that just became your default, your comfort mode, right?
And one of the big things that this is bringing up for me is also so many of our veterans and just people in general are now working with things like antidepressants and SSRIs, antipsychotics, and all sorts of other pharmaceuticals to heal some of the pain of that rushing river
Mm,
going in the same direction. And really, eventually, the other side of it ends up being like a dam, right? Or like a big wall. And then it's just slamming up against the wall.
sure.
I feel like the water has nowhere to go. So it starts to fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up, and it becomes uncomfortable at that place because there's all this pressure. Well, what a lot of these pharmaceuticals are doing is just numbing the feeling of the pressure. And that's not to say that they are bad. I deeply honor and understand that there are places in our lives in which when the pressure builds up so intensely, especially in our suppressed emotional processes, we need to have a sense of ease for a moment. We have
Sure.
to experience ease in order to know that we can even continue, that
Yeah.
we have the energy to be like, okay, like I can actually face this and understand how to redirect this water supply to another way. But SSRIs, benzos, all of these different medicines that we are taking do not solve the root problem, which is that the direction of the flow needs to be shifted.
Sure. Yeah. And
And the only
yeah.
thing that can do that really that I have found, other than long-term support of other altered states of consciousness, like breath work, meditation, all these other techniques that then quiet that default mode network and highlight other parts of the brain and then encourage new neural pathways, are psychedelics, because psychedelics not only encourage and highlight those creative centers, they quite literally create the new neural pathways and regenerate neurons called neurogenesis and basically birth new neurons that then are using the new neural pathways and are brand new. So they don't even have the programming of the old.
Sure. Sure. And when you have someone who has been in that state for so long, where they're either depressed or whatever the issue is, and they do get, like you were saying, they do get prescribed a
Mhm.
antidepressant or some other medication. The way I think of that type of medication is kind of like if you were to break your leg, you get a cast on that leg. The cast
Yes,
is not a
I love
a
that.
permanent solution, right? It's allowing your body to heal for that temporary period that you have that cast on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you take it off and you don't need it anymore, right? And
Right.
so, with in a lot of cases, there are people who need that break, that reprieve from whatever it is that they've been going through, so that they can just take a minute and breathe and be like, okay, let's figure this stuff out. Because sometimes when you're in it, it's like you feel like you're drowning almost, and it's like you just can't see a way out of it. And if you can just give yourself that little bit of a break, just for a temporary period, maybe a few months or something like that, until you're able to work through that, then great. And the way I see it is it's not meant to be a long-term solution. It's just kind of meant to kind of give you a little bit of relief for that
Mhm.
short time
Yeah.
period, so you can
It's a
work through
little
it.
reprieve. Yes, I think that's a beautiful way. Yeah, pain reliever. It is a structure within which you then have the ability to start to regenerate. One of the big challenges with most of our medications is they then lend themselves to addictive tendencies because our whole culture is based on addiction
Hmm.
and getting you addicted to things, whether it be Netflix or Instagram or a substance or alcohol or any of these things that then distract us outside of ourselves. So these medications often carry a similar energy and it becomes very difficult to wean off of them. And also our clinicians are not often trained to encourage people to wean off of them when the cast is complete. So just like a doctor, a surgeon would be like, okay, so we're going to put the cast on, and then we're going to take the cast off at this time. Then we're going to put this kind of cast on. And there's a whole offboarding completion process for the setting of the bone and the reconstruction of your leg, right?
Sure.
But with antidepressants, it's a life sentence. And that is the energy that we approach with it, because we think, oh, you're just going to be stuck like this forever, and this is how you're going to be. And we know now that is not true. That there is absolutely, quote, a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a rainbow and gold at the end of that rainbow. Like, there is the elixir of life is waiting for you. And we do need to have proper offboarding processes and weaning processes. But one thing that we do in our work is our microdosing protocols are very specifically designed for particular ailments in society. And one of them is designed for weaning off of antidepressants and other pharmaceutical medications. So we have gathered, all the scientific research that has been out there, as well as our own anecdotal experience of doing it ourselves. Many of our facilitators have weaned off of medications. My own sister, my mother, family members, like all of these humans around me have gone through their battles with these. And I have gone through with even like functional alcoholism, because the military is basically a house for functional alcoholism.
Sure.
So all of us know some version of addiction. And so we've built protocols specifically for that, so that people can learn how to wean off.
And that's an interesting way to look at it too, because I never really thought of it this way, but the medication that you might be taking could be causing some sort of traumatic response as well within you, because especially if you become dependent on it and you're kind of hooked on it. Now it's time to stop taking it, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, wait, no, don't take that away. I kind of need that. Like, let's
I need
bring
that
back a little bit, And so there might need to be some rewiring there as well, so that can successfully be weaned off of.
And I would also add, in terms of traumatic, adding to the trauma, is that pharmaceuticals cause a blunting of emotions, which we think of as a blunting of the negative emotions, but it's a blunting of the happy emotions as well.
Right.
So it's your entire emotional experience is now reduced to this small little window of emotion. And the physical human body is an animal system that needs to be able to primally express itself. And so then those emotions just, once again, build up and create more and more discomfort. And then when we're looking at other sort of hyperregulatory medications like Adderall, people end up experiencing, with all of these, tachyphylaxis, which is where you have to take more over time to get the same result.
Sure.
And then you're putting more chemicals in your body. And ultimately, then the weaning process from Adderall takes years, because your body is so dependent on that it does not know how to operate without it. And so we at Metamorphosis, although we deeply believe in and support plant medicine, our vision is sobriety, total sobriety from all things. Really, like breath and spring water should be your drug.
Sure.
Because those are the spice of life.
And that's, I think the goal really for anybody really should be that is to not require those types of medications, whether it's a psychedelic, whether it's a antidepressant, whether it's whatever it is. Your body makes a lot of good stuff on its own, and you should be able to rely on that. Now granted, there are exceptions. There's people who have things that don't quite fire off the way they should or whatever, and so I don't want to get angry emails off of any of that kind of stuff. But so I understand that may not be 100% possible for everybody, but there are so many medications out there that people end up taking. Like you said, they end up just sticking on them because it's easier to stay on than it is to come off. And so how do you go off of that, right? And so, but when you combine something like, psychedelics or, that type of treatment, that being done in conjunction with some sort of more traditional therapy likely will help probably, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but will help you kind of rewire some of those connections a little bit better, right?
Scott, you're nailing it. Yes. That is precisely both the possibility of the psychedelic industry, and right now it's sort of worst nightmare, because right now there's almost everything is underground. And so most people will go in for a macro experience, and they will work just with the medicine, and they will expect this pill to change everything for them, or this mushroom, right? And they will expect to take it and then everything changes. And what we are teaching at Metamorphosis is that it's all in the integration. It's a step-by-step process. And the only way that we do that is with other integrative techniques that often are involving many other layers of your being. So we believe in the 3 planes of existence: the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And for us, the mental plane is actually based in the heart mind, not the brain mind. And that heart mind is the whole emotional body as well as the intellectual body. And that requires us to do things like traditional therapy, talk therapy, cognitive therapy, EMDR. And what we're seeing in our community are these groundbreaking techniques where we combine things like 5-MeO-DMT, which is an animal medicine from the Sonoran desert toad called bufo, in connection with and in combination with things like internal family systems, which is a parts work cognitive therapy process in which we go deep into our exiled parts, and then we bring them up. And with the added layer of an experience like a microdose experience with 5-MeO-DMT, we can get so much deeper into your being. You could actually go to those places of those small child parts that have been exiled for decades, and you can have full conversations and healings with them. And what that does is it ripples through your whole being, and then you no longer are acting from that exiled child part, which is usually, when you think of an exiled child part, imagine a little child that's been left in a room, a toddler, a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old that's been left in a room for a very long time. What are they going to start acting like? Like an animal.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
They're
It's
going
not
to
going to be pretty. No.
It would not be pretty. It would be poop everywhere. It would be like just a disaster.
Yeah.
And they would start to get really angry. And then they would also go into a fear state. So that's the amygdala. And basically we have these little parts of ourselves. So this is just one of the techniques that we're seeing now is possible. But all of our work involves integrative, cognitive, emotional, therapeutic techniques along with the medication, or the medicine, the sacrament, and the weaning off of medication, which that whole process creates complete rebirths, complete changes in people, which is really what I want to see, because not only was it true for myself, but this work saved my sister's life when she was on the verge of committing suicide. And of course, so many of our veterans experienced that same thing. And witnessing that was, heartwarming to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I started this show, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, is I want to provide these options and these resources and these tools that are available. And for the longest time, I avoided talking about psychedelics at all, largely because I know, legalities with, certain types of medications, especially here in the US, it's not always, legal to use all these things. And the last thing I wanted to do is have anyone get in trouble for doing what they're doing to get the help that they need, because that just now they're dealing with
then you're just re-victimizing.
That's just causing a whole host of other issues. But there are, things that are taking place now where certain psychedelic type medications are, becoming, more and more readily available, and there are people like yourself who are helping people use them, safely and in the right way. And, so you're not just, using it on your own and hoping for the best, and you know what I mean? Like you're just rolling the dice at that point, and
Yeah.
that's not a great way to look at it. But, using it in a way that is, done responsibly.
Yeah.
There's many options out there, and of course, look into the legalities of things where you are and everything like that. And I'm putting that general disclaimer out there
Yes.
because I don't want people getting in trouble.
Very
But
critical.
yeah, exactly. But I also felt like eventually I started feeling like I'm doing a disservice to folks because I'm talking about all these other options, and there are other options that I'm just not talking about because I hadn't really discussed psychedelics at all
Mhm.
up until just, a couple months ago. I started, introducing this as a topic, on the show, and I think by talking about it and at least just giving people information about it, letting people
Yeah.
know that it exists, that it's something that they could explore if they feel like that they've tried everything and nothing seems to be working for them. Well, maybe there's something else. And like you said with your sister and, all these other veterans that we lose every day, if there's an option out there that can help keep you here till tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, then why not explore it? Yeah, maybe it seems like all hope is lost right now, that things are tough, things are difficult, and doesn't seem like there's any way that it can get any better for you. But doesn't mean that that's true. Be open to that
Yeah.
possibility that maybe there's something out there that can help you. And,
Yes.
and that's why I felt like, having someone like yourself come on the show who can talk about this and share, a little bit about what this whole journey might look like, and, what people can expect from it. And, I'm sure there's many other questions that people are going to have. And I'd love to give you the opportunity right now to share a little bit about, your company and where people can go
Mhm.
to find out more information about what you guys do and where they can get in touch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for trusting yourself and your wisdom and your intuition. That is the thing that I believe deeply in, and I know to be our ability to now be free when we trust ourselves and be in self-authority. And no matter what the social construct is around the thing.
Sure.
What I'll say about our company on the same tangent, both my parents are attorneys. So when I came to them after going to the Naval Academy and being an officer in the Marine Corps and being working in tech and all the, things I was supposed to do, they were like, "You want to do what with what?"
What do those hippies over at Facebook get you
Yeah,
doing?
like what happened to you? And they said, "Okay, well, if and luckily I have parents that are very trusting, and they said, okay, well, how are you going to make it legal? And how does this work get protected? Because the people that you're bringing, you want to protect them as well." And I said, "You're exactly right. I do." So House of Metamorphosis so Metamorphosis overall is an ecoverse of organizations. We have multiple organizations within and under the house of the name Metamorphosis. And one of them is called House of Metamorphosis, which is our 508c1a, which is a faith-based organization that is centered around the sacrament of plant medicine. And we have various types of plant medicine that we work with. Our sort of signature in our community grown medicine is called Trinity, and it is a subgenetic blend of 3 strains of psilocybin mushroom. And whenever we engage with it, it is in whole form, and people can access it in micro form, in capsule form, which is just the ground mushroom in capsules. And all of that is legally protected under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, which is a federal act. And we could go into all the details of that. But basically, House of Metamorphosis allows you to come to our containers, our live events, as well as one-on-one events with our certified facilitators, and to engage with our microdosing protocols in your own home in an ethical and legal manner when you become a virtual member of our community. So So that was something that was really critical for me. And then also in Metamorphosis Ventures, which is our business side of the organization, our for-profit side, we offer coaching programs. We have a full initiation program for leaders and also for facilitators and servers. And this year, our big live event that I would love for people to join us for is called MetaFest. We do it, at least right now, we've been doing it every 2 years. This one's going to be really big and beautiful and magnificent. You're actually catching me right after I did a site visit at the venue. So the venue is magnificent. It's up in Yosemite, and it's sort of like an outdoor conference slash festival summit experience where we will have everything from beautiful, magnificent healers to ritual performances, music, and of course, just communing with people, as well as a microdosing ceremony for everyone who would like to participate. So all of those are protected, and really what we are about is community. We want to bring people together because we also know that mirror neurons are a big thing. So when you are being mirrored in your process and also being supported by people who are like-minded and like-hearted, you progress faster, and you kind of through osmosis learn from all these people around you. And we bring together what we would call new earth leaders, entrepreneurs, visionaries, the workers, the healers, who want to help create this new reality that accepts plant medicine as a powerful tool of healing and activation. So come to MetaFest if you want to join us. You can also visit us at metamorphosis.global online, and then join our newsletter, because right now that's the safest place for us to continue to share this information with you. Social media is a little iffy sometimes, so we haven't fully built that out. Even though I've worked at Instagram and Facebook, I love it. I love those platforms, but right now they are not yet ready for the psychedelic movement.
Sure. Yeah, and I fully expect that things like that are tough to promote on
Yeah.
those types of platforms. So
Yeah.
yeah, email is probably the best way to go. And it's always
The
good, just
safest.
from a business perspective, to own your own platform, as far as where, everything from your website to your email list to all the things that are part of your business don't rely on Facebook being there tomorrow, because it's a company like any other, and it could disappear too. As much as it might seem, out of the realm of possibility. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember, MySpace and those
Mhm.
type of GeoCities and all
Definitely.
these other things that
Yeah.
they're not
They
like
could end,
they
and the
can go
band
away.
hammer is a real thing, like all these things,
Exactly.
right?
So
It is outsourcing to an external authority in some ways. So we aim to be able to have a more, and actually it's kind of pushed us into having a more authentic person to person relationship with people, and to build community in a new way. And we also have a Discord, which I'll share so that you'll be able to join that. That's a channel
okay.
that has all sorts of different resources in it. And we'd love for you to join that and get to know our community better.
Excellent. Yeah. And so we'll put those links in the show notes for the listeners to check out if they're interested and want to find out more about what you do, or, attend any of the upcoming events or anything like that. Get on the email list. All those
Mhm.
links will be there for you. So check that out. Susannah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate you coming on, sharing your story, and sharing the work that you do, and for the work that you do, because, I think it's important that folks have options, and, this is another one of those options that I think, a lot of times gets overlooked. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for creating this space. I appreciate you.